Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. A fiery, testy, dramatic last hour in court in Donald Trump's criminal election interference hush money trial. Robert Costello, he's a witness called to the stand today by the defense. He was responding to objections that were sustained by Judge Merchan in such an objectionable way that Judge Duane St, who has been a portrait of calm, had to momentarily clear the courtroom of both the jury and the press for the sole purpose of admonishing Costello and regaining order inside his courtroom. Quote, "I'd like to discuss proper decorum," he said, "in my courtroom," before everyone was cleared out. Quote, "You don't give me side-eye, and you don't roll your eyes," end quote. Robert Costello is the lawyer who once advised Michael Cohen. Cohen never hires him, but they're talking for long enough to have established attorney-client privilege. Costello, according to Michael Cohen's direct testimony, formed a back channel to Donald Trump when Cohen was the target of a federal criminal investigation in 2018. Costello claims that Michael Cohen told him that Trump didn't know about the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. That is something that Michael Cohen established in his direct testimony, and Cohen testified to the reason for that being he didn't trust him not to tell Rudy Giuliani. New York Times reports from Cohen's testimony this, quote, "When questioning Cohen last week, the prosecution spotlighted his communications with Mr. Costello. Their emails and calls," Mr. Cohen said, "left him with the impression that Mr. Costello was doing Trump's bidding, delivering implicit instructions to, in the former fixer's words, quote, 'stay in the fold, don't flip, don't speak.'" Costello testified today that he never pressured Cohen to do anything, and he slammed the ex-president's former fixer, calling him a, quote, "drama queen." Judge Duane St grew frustrated with Costello again, saying during his cross-examination this, quote, "Sir, if you're able to answer yes or no, answer yes or no. If you're not able to answer yes or no, let Ms. Hoffinger know and she will rephrase." As we reported in the last few minutes, Trump attorney Todd Blanche, again, as he does most days, is urging the judge to dismiss the entire case, saying Michael Cohen's testimony should not be allowed to be considered by the jury. The judge's response, quote, "Do you think that he's going to fool 12 New Yorkers?" End quote. A mic drop moment for anyone who just happens to be a New Yorker. The judge saying he will reserve his decision, and court is now adjourned for the day. Wow. It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Outside the courthouse for us once again, NBC News correspondent Yasmin Vesuvian is back with us. With us at the table, former federal prosecutor, former SDNY Criminal Division Deputy Chief, MSNBC legal analyst Christy Greenberg's back, senior executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion and MSNBC political analyst Tim O'Brien's back with us, and making his Deadline debut, former Manhattan prosecutor, familiar face to MSNBC viewers, Jeremy Saland is here. Jeremy, I start with you. Your thoughts on what's just transpired. It's, again, I'm not listening to it. I'm reading transcripts, but it's the most dramatic Merchan has been on the page.
And this is pre-planned. Any witness that I would have and I would call, and I've called many in that courthouse, I'm telling them to win it with respect, win it with the right answers, look the jury in the eye, look the judge at the time in the eye, look everyone in the eye, and be cool, calm, collected, because if you have no credibility and you're bombastic and you seem like you're fighting back too much, then you've dehumanized yourself. You've changed any kind of empathy or credibility that you might have. So this is really playing to Donald Trump, and certainly, in my view, not the right approach to say, I'm a credible guy, don't believe Michael Cohen.
So why go in to rebut basically a piece of Cohen's testimony if you're going to alienate the judge and the jury? You know,
because on its face, you need to do that. You need to challenge and say, listen, Michael Cohen told me, I think he said 10 or 12 times, that the president didn't know anything about it, or then not the president then, but Donald Trump didn't know anything about this cover-up hush money situation. But you still need to get that, and that's worth the effort. But why he's behaving this way, it just doesn't add up to me. I think it's a wrong approach. It's the wrong approach. We may have different we may have different views on strategy. It's the wrong approach.
Have you seen Judge Merchan react like this up to this point?
No, he's shown such restraint. He's been so even-handed the entire time. But this is beyond the pale. You have somebody who's, I mean, look, I've seen witnesses act up on the stand, but you don't typically see that from lawyers who are witnesses. And this is a lawyer who held my old job at the Southern District of New York. He was the deputy chief of the criminal division. You would expect that he would have respect for the court. You want to take on Michael Cohen and attack his credibility? That's why he was put on? That's fine. But you don't show disrespect to the judge, because the jury sees that. And Michael Cohen, everybody was concerned going into his testimony about how he would hold up, what his demeanor would be. He was incredibly respectful. He was composed. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I mean, he really did not get rattled. And you now just saw the complete opposite from this witness, who I think really must have turned jurors off, because jurors tend to like the judge. And this judge in particular has been very kind, I think, to the jury, and respectful of their time, respectful of when they needed time off to work. And when you are giving side eye to the judge, when you're scoffing and making comments, like, jurors, in particular the two lawyers on this jury, know that's not how it's supposed to work. It is, as far as I can tell, a game changer for this case, because really we're not talking about any issues about Michael Cohen's credibility anymore. Now we're all talking about Bob Costello's antics. He is a defense witness. This is going to be held against the defense.
You know, Yasmin, is Trump's right to put on a defense? Is Trump's right to put on a guy who, again, I'm just reading transcripts, reads like a grumpy Archie Bunker? But when Archie Bunker turns into a rattlesnake that bites Duane St, it seems that all bets are off.
Christy's exactly right. We're now talking about Robert Costello's credibility, right? And I think that Blanche and Trump's defense team, they were questioning as to whether or not they were going to even put Robert Costello on the stand from the very get-go. If we think back, Nicole, to last week, our own Tom Winter reached out to Robert Costello. He said he was ready, willing, and able to testify. He said that publicly as well in the media. This guy was gunning to take the stand. And to speak to what Christy was just talking about, I was in the courtroom when Stormy Daniels was testifying on that very first day. And she was admonished numerous times by Judge Duane St inside that courtroom, because she was droning on and going off subject and not necessarily answering the questions as succinctly as the judge had wanted. He was getting annoyed with her. And the jury took to that. They read that. And they seemed at some point annoyed with her first day of testimony as well in that moment. And I imagine something similar happened on the stand today as the judge was admonishing Robert Costello as well. An attorney, as Christy rightly points out, on the stand as a witness for the defense. I think it's one of the reasons why the defense was so worried and or not necessarily planning for Robert Costello to take the stand from the get-go, but then suddenly decided to because of his testimony last week and some of his public statements as well. Whether or not that was a mistake, I think, though, is something they're probably questioning now.
You know, Tim, we made a mistake, I think, in covering Trump as someone who inadvertently blew up norms. He did it on purpose. And I wonder if we're making the same mistake in a legal context.
Well, I mean, I think, that is Donald Trump's crew. And I don't think I think everything that happened today was choreographed by their side. I think it blew up in their face, possibly, in a way they didn't anticipate. But when you think about the fact that Bob Costello testified before the House Committee on the Weaponization of Government.
I don't think that's its actual name. Something
yes,
like, is that it? I thought it was the weaponization of the. Oh no, you're right.
I think it's the weaponization of government. Yeah. Either way, it's a ridiculous name.
Didn't work out.
Yeah. In our ridiculous era, here's a committee with a ridiculous name, with someone they bring in the last day of cross on Michael Cohen into a congressional committee, and he says basically what he said today in court. His firm, this is such a New York moment, right? The managing partner in Bob Costello's firm is Sid Davidoff. Sid Davidoff was a fixer in Bronx politics in the Ed Koch era, and the scandal that brought Ed Koch down was prosecuted by Rudy Giuliani. And these guys are now all hanging together, and they know they are this certain kind of, I think, New York fixture where they know how the system works, they watch each other's back, and they appear for one another when they need to. That's clearly the cloth that Rudy is cut out of. And that's who I think Bob Costello is. Justice Merchan gave very clear guidance to the defense for why he was going to allow Costello to be admitted as a witness. And he wanted it to be specific and narrow. And I think he probably sat there once Costello sat down and was casual with his responses to the prosecutors, on the borderline of being flip and disrespectful that he thought, oh my God, I gave these people an inch and now they're taking a mile, which of course is what they intended to do. And so he has to clear the courtroom. I'm very interested to see what he said to them, because it also didn't change their behavior. They came right back in and did it again, and then did it again. I think he cleared the courtroom 3 times, twice, I'm not sure. And it's it's a reminder, as you said, of the complete disregard this collection of people have for the rule of law, process, and institutions that all of us rely on for civic society to function properly. And this is yet another demonstration of how they're willing to just drop a bomb. I think the other thing that's going on is that most of this trial, until Michael Cohen appeared, was pretty surgical. I mean, Stormy Daniels' testimony wasn't surgical, but the prosecution was moving through witnesses, and I think the defense saw Michael Cohen as a Hail Mary almost. They needed to demolish him, and I don't think they felt they had, and I think that's why you now have Bob Costello in here to try to further prejudice the jury against the prosecution, but I don't think it worked.
Let me just tell our viewers what we're doing right now. We are monitoring Trump as we do every day so that you don't have to. If he makes any news that we can corroborate as being truthful, we'll tell you about it. Right now he's reading from a notepad, as he sometimes does. Actually, sometimes he waves around papers. Today it seems to be written on a notepad. He's wearing blue. His brigade is wearing red. We're not sure if that's planned, but we'll try to run that down for you as well, since the outfit seems to be the point. I want to ask you, Jeremy, about the substance of what's in the record in front of the jury when it comes to this defense witness, Mr. Costello. What they've heard on direct from Cohen is that it was Costello who, I mean, what the prosecution seemed to put into the record and supported with voluminous emails, I think I remember, was that Costello very much wanted to represent Cohen. And Cohen had sort of a spidey sense, I know that's not a legal term, but a spidey sense that maybe he's not going to be all for me, that he was like a cutout, basically, through Rudy to Trump, trying to get him to stay quiet, as they successfully did with Paul Manafort. I mean, if you go back to 2018, they were running this operation with people other than Cohen, anyone ensnared in the Mueller probe, and it was Papadopoulos in 2018, it was Cohen, it was Gates, and it worked with Manafort, and I think it worked with Papadopoulos. Gates and Cohen, and in totally different federal criminal investigations, Gates with the Mueller probe and Cohen with SDNY's election interference case, they cooperate. And at the time, Trump went on in Fox News, I think, and said, I hate flippers. I've always hated them. Always hated their guts. Never mind that now he was president of the United States and on an org chart sat atop DOJ. Was there latitude for the prosecution? And do you think we'll see them go back to the original direct testimony about Costello's role as a cutout, basically implicitly promising pardons?
I think that's a real possibility. But, I think, frankly, the quicker this ends, the better off everyone is.
Yeah.
There's diminishing returns for everybody. Costello, as we just said before, didn't do himself any favors and certainly didn't do Donald Trump any favors. The more they're speaking, the more confusing it gets. Arguably, is that good for the defense? If people came out and came across as honest and credible, I think it would be beneficial. Here, I simply don't think that's the case. And I think it's also sort of a preview, if you will, that if Costello is this way, and I'm not really answering your question, I'm sorry, I'm just changing because things are evolving in the moment. But if Costello is this way on the stand now, can you fathom how Donald Trump would be, how bombastic he would be? So this was the opportunity, really was, and it wasn't a paralegal to put in some documents in terms of phone calls. This was the opportunity to corroborate their defense, even though they don't have to do so. It's not their burden. And to go after Michael Cohen and tear him down. And Michael Cohen, who was respectful, and Michael Cohen, who answered fairly cleanly, and they failed to do so. And in terms of anyone cooperating, you look at who Donald Trump surrounded himself with. People who cooperate to get their own behind safe and clear from the trouble that he allegedly created. And the people who do what they need to do, even if that's skirting the law, because that's what the boss wants. So it's now coming home to roost. And all of these characters, no matter what side they're falling on, seem to have that same trait. And it's telling. And where it's coming from is the boss, Donald Trump.
And with all that being very much part of the narrative, right, of what the story the prosecution has told since his first witness, David Pecker, who said, the boss and I, the two principals.
Who was great, by the way.
Pecker and Cohen, right? They're the two principals that hatched the whole plan to catch and kill. And then Cohen, from the first witness all the way through, frankly, to his own direct testimony, he's the staffer, right? He's going back and forth. His own banker says he can't do anything because he can't reach Trump. He's got Keith David. I mean, everyone, and it's not really flattering, right? They're not flattering depictions, but everyone describes him as having a leash this long from Donald Trump. He can't do anything without getting Trump's permission, and not having the budget. You know, he has to run every expense by Donald Trump. What on the sort of the volume of evidence that supports all that, what did they achieve in their cross of Michael Cohen that aided any of that evidence?
Well, you know, you have to do it brick by brick. You're not going to, we've heard people use the term knockout punch, you know, down goes Frazier, you know, going after these guys, and that just doesn't happen in the real world. So it's brick by brick, you know, jab by jab, that he's just a dishonest person. And I think they did a good job to confront him on some of his credibility issues about things that he changed his story about. And he lied to his wife, he lied to the judge when he pleaded guilty, but in fact it was a tax fraud case. You're a lying convicted felon. I think they were a little long in the tooth, and they kind of kept on hitting the same point. At some point you get I say a sleeping jury could be an acquitting jury, a sleeping jury could be a convicting jury, you never know, but at some point you lose your jury. I think they just went too long, and this is to my point of diminishing returns, but I do think in substance they did a decent job with Michael Cohen. Is it decent enough? I'm not quite sure it is, because you surround yourself with the people who have the dirty hands. Those are the people who know what's going on. There's no cooperator who's an angel. There's no cooperator who's not involved. There's no cooperator who doesn't have baggage. Sammy the Bull, you know, Henry Hill, for Goodfellas lovers. These were people who were bad dudes who were there and testifying and corroborating because they were in the thick of it. You get what you get.
In the thick of it is the perfect way to describe Michael Cohen. Yasmin, I noted on redirect, it was the opposite strategy. It was short, it was concise, it was just what was necessary. Your sense of how that went today?
Yeah, I agree. I think with redirect on Michael Cohen specifically, they wanted to hone in on that October 24th date, right? You and I have been talking about this for the last couple of days since it came up. You think back to last Thursday, right? It was that moment in which Todd Blanche felt as if the defense felt as if they had this win, right? It was that October 24th phone call around 8:02 p.m. in which Michael Cohen reached out to Keith Schiller to then subsequently talk to Donald Trump. He testified essentially that conversation was about 90 seconds or so long, and in that conversation, Donald Trump said the go-ahead, right? Pay off Stormy Daniels, and it was a moment in which Todd Blanche kind of had a win for the defense back on Thursday, and he said, how is it essentially in 90 seconds or so, and I'm paraphrasing here, Nicole, that you could talk about that and then also talk about this person who was harassing you on your phone, this 14-year-old who was harassing you on your phone, and you sent text messages relaying this phone number of this individual asking for Keith Schiller's help, and yet you testified to the fact that phone call was when Donald Trump told you to go ahead and send the money to Keith Davidson just 2 days later. Well, on redirect, we knew they were going to try and clean this up, right? Clean up on aisle 6 for the prosecution. And they did it by the admissibility of a photo. And there was some back and forth as to the admissibility of a video from C-SPAN showing Donald Trump and Keith Schiller walking off the stage together at a campaign event. And then instead of allowing this video in for evidence, they allowed the still photo of this moment, kind of establishing the fact that, in fact, and you're looking at the photo now on your screens, the two of them were together at that very moment that Michael Cohen testifies to the fact that he then, a few minutes later, called Keith Schiller to speak to Donald Trump to get the go-ahead, the green light, to pay off Stormy Daniels. It was, in my sense, a very effective way in cleaning up, especially that cross-examination from Todd Blanche on Michael Cohen, which I think really encapsulated the redirect. The redirect was very clean. It was very short and essentially kind of driving home the same points. Did you do this on behalf of Donald Trump? Were these reimbursement checks as well? Driving home those same points, but trying to clean up also some of the points in which they felt like Michael Cohen fell short during cross-examination, Nicole.
All right, no one's going anywhere. There's much more to get to on this 19th day of the disgraced ex-president's election interference hush money criminal trial. We'll be back in just a minute. Plus, how our politics came to this right now today. We'll be joined here on set by my friend, longtime journalist, former White House senior staffer, George Stephanopoulos. His new book is called The Situation Room, the inside story of presidents in crisis. It's fantastic. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We are all back with Yasmin, Christy, Tim, and Jeremy. I have to say that some days in the breaks, we kind of check our notes, check our phones. People are still digesting this incredibly dramatic, and in some ways, it may not be the legal climax, but it is the emotional and dramatic climax of the first ever criminal trial of an American ex-president to date. There's some analysis that Costello may have really blown Trump's I didn't do it thing. They may have really created, relative to Cohen, a real thug, a real example of someone who disrespects the process and the judge and, by extension, the jurors. I want to come back to what Yasmin was reporting on in terms of this surgical redirect that the state did with Michael Cohen to deal with what was widely believed to be one blow that was potentially decisive that was landed on Michael Cohen about this April 24th phone call. Now, notably, there was nothing challenged about the calls on the 26th, which is when the money is actually transferred to Stormy Daniels. But on the 24th, this is the redirect today about the phone calls with Trump about the payment to Stormy Daniels. Quote, were some of the conversations by phone? Yes. Were some of them longer? Yes. Were some of them shorter than the minute 30? Yes. Approximately how many conversations did you have with Mr. Trump about the Stormy Daniels matter during this time? Answer, more than 20. Hoffinger then asked Michael about how and why he reviewed the phone records to help refresh his memory about all those 20 calls. How did reviewing the documents, which have already been entered into evidence for this jury, assist you? Michael Cohen, it helped to refresh my memory. Did you recall the general sum and substance of those conversations you had with Mr. Trump? Michael Cohen, yes. Do you have any doubt that you had conversations with Mr. Trump that you should work out payments to Stormy Daniels with Alan Weisselberg? Michael Cohen, no doubt. Do you have any doubt that you did work it out with Mr. Weisselberg? Michael Cohen, no doubt. Do you have any doubt that Mr. Trump gave you the final sign-off to pay Stormy Daniels? Michael Cohen, I have no doubt. Would you have made that payment without Mr. Trump's sign-off? No. On this matter of the 24th phone call being muddied up, one way that he succeeded was in sort of convincing us in the moment that you couldn't talk about two things in 90 seconds. I may be in the minority, but I don't have a call in my log longer than about 2.5 minutes. I'm a working mom, so most people may be kinder than me and stay on the phone longer, but I don't talk about less than 11 things in those 2.5 minutes usually. So why was that so damaging, and do you think they successfully got this part of the case back on track?
She 100% got it back on track. Her redirect was phenomenal. I mean, it was, as Yasmin said, surgical. Really, we had just been treated to an entire morning of kind of more long and meandering questions on cross, where you're not even sure where the line of questioning is going. You can kind of guess, but he doesn't really close the loop. And then came Susan Hoffinger, point by point. You had no doubt. You had no doubt. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. No doubt. And it was just so important because he was so certain. You can talk about multiple things at once. She brought that out. It was one question, but it was such an important question. And again, I think that you, as jurors, you have to make it clear to them just how long 90 seconds can be. Like, if I was in that position, if I was the prosecutor during the summation, I would take a chunk of 90 seconds at some point and talk about, here's all the things that he said they talked about during those 90 seconds. It would not take 90 seconds to get there, and just make it clear just how long that can be. I also thought that, this attempt to say, well, he had a lot going on, so he wouldn't remember. These are things you remember. There are significant details that you will remember from 8 years ago, and then there are insignificant details from yesterday that you won't remember talking to somebody about. These mattered.
You've been talking for less than 60 seconds.
And it feels like forever.
The prosecutors also introduced a photo of Keith Schiller and Donald Trump together on October 24th, 2016. And the defense fought allowing it to be entered. There was a lot of back and forth about whether or not it was hearsay, They reached a compromise, and it got entered. So both of those men are in the same place on the same day, and there's no reason Michael Cohen couldn't have spoken to both of them on the same day. And I'm still amazed that this is even like an evidentiary windfall, because I don't know how much the jury cared about the idea that there was this one phone call about a different subject, and that might have precluded any other conversations. It's just seemed very very slender read to build the idea that Michael Cohen was misrepresenting his communications with Donald Trump.
But it wasn't about the evidence, right? It was about dirtying up Michael Cohen. That's how I read it, right?
Yeah, but
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Either, I mean, you're both
well,
there.
I mean, but I just think, I don't know that this dirtied him up. I mean, I do think, before Michael Cohen got on the witness stand, you had a voluminous amount of documentation and a series of witnesses that created a fact pattern that transcends Michael Cohen's testimony. And I think that they were there to try to just knock him out, but I don't know how much that matters at the end of the day.
Part of their goal was to make this not about falsifying business records. It's to make it about Stormy Daniels, the extortionist, blackmailer, sextortionist, whatever you want to call her. And then number two, and arguably much more important, is you have another guy who just can't be trusted, who's dishonest and out for revenge and to make a buck. This has nothing to do with falsifying business records. I didn't know what was going on. Whether it holds water, we'll find out soon enough. But that was their objective. And just very, very briefly, we're talking off camera about that 90 seconds. I was sharing that I had a trial against the Hells Angels, there was someone from the Hells Angels there today. And at one point, there was an issue about a cooperating witness seeing another individual strike the complainant in the head with a bat. And it was for 90 seconds. And in the middle of that summation, I just stopped for 30 seconds. And people looked and looked and looked and what's going on? 30 seconds is an eternity. Next time you're in traffic for a minute and a half, think of who you could call and what you can do on your phone in that minute and a half. Or you're stuck on the subway underground. You're like, I need to get down to Union Square. Think how long a minute and a half is. That's a decade.
Okay, I have 11 follow-up questions. One, I always fail those workouts that are like 3 minutes a day. I can't get through like the first 8 seconds of a plank. So believe me, I know how long 30 seconds is.
Well, just don't do them.
Correct, I don't do them because 30 seconds is too long. I want to ask you, why were the Hells Angels there today?
Because he is pulling in anyone who is loyal to him. And I use the term, I was on with Ari Melbourne, and it's a harsh term, but I think there's a bunch of bootlickers. And basically, they want the spoils if Donald Trump becomes president. We had the governor of one of the Dakotas, whichever one he was from, come in to besmirch the New York City and New York State judicial process. What are you doing here? Deal with your neighboring governor who shot her dog and goat. Don't come here and tell us how to run this courthouse. We have a judge who's doing a good job. Politically, I get it. I totally get it. You want to get a piece of the pie, your own little fiefdom. But in that courtroom, again, we all would agree, he's innocent until proven guilty. I think anyone who is so warped with their glasses, blue or red, doesn't deserve and shouldn't be a part of that process. And we should presume that Blanche and the team got rid of those they thought would not be fair, despite what you may hear on certain news outlets. But outside of that courtroom and physically in the courtroom with Gates, they're doing themselves a disservice, at least in that courthouse, because the jury sees that and they're saying, who are these people? Why are they here? It's just going to make them more intimidated and anxious. They're disservice inside and outside.
Yasmin, I understand from other news outlets that Trump's still talking. What is going on outside the courthouse, and why are they all wearing red ties?
We don't really know why they're all wearing red ties, but it does seem to be a uniform. By the way, every time I speak to any of these kind of quote-unquote surrogates, the people that show up on behalf of the former president, they say they're here on their own volition. That being said, they always remain in places when it is that Trump's team remains in places. If they were actually here just as the general public or on their own volition, they would also have to, for instance, not necessarily be in the first 2 rows of the courtroom as only Trump's team is allowed in those first 2 rows of the courtroom, right? So there are reserved seats for Trump's team, and that is where all of these individuals sit, despite the fact that they are making this claim that they are here as members of the public. I will say, Nicole, they held this this press conference in the courtyard just in front of me, about 50 yards away. And it was the biggest circus I had seen throughout my entire time of covering this trial so far from the beginning today. I couldn't even make out really what they were saying. They were kind of repeating the same things over and over again, right? This is a sham. This wouldn't have happened to anybody else just because he's running for re-election, so on and so forth. It was a total and utter circus because also there were protesters in this courtyard in front of me. Protesters that were here against the former president of the United States, calling for justice, right, saying nobody is above the law. And they were shouting at all these lawmakers who were holding this press conference in the middle of the day while the trial was ongoing behind me. The former president in that hallway, every time he walks out over the last couple of days, because of this gag order, of course, Nicole, he essentially just reads from his Twitter feed, but reads essentially things that have been reposted on his Twitter feed, right? People that are saying this is a sham trial. For instance, he read a comment made by Alan Dershowitz at one point a couple of days ago. And then he said, well, he's a Democrat and he shouldn't be a Democrat, but I agree with his opinion on this. And then, by the way, Nicole, guess who showed up in the courtroom today? As we all know, Alan Dershowitz was sitting in those first two front rows. But that's what he's continuing to do in the hallway outside the courtroom.
And this guy is on the menu. If it sounds good to you, you can order it for president in November. It's insane. Yasmin Vesuvian, Christy Greenberg, Tim O'Brien, Jeremy Saland, thank you all so much for starting us off with our coverage